Hello, everybody. Randy Patterson here from the super secret Boomerocity Man Cave and in front of the official Boomerocity Christmas tree. I never get it right, but there it is. First of all, this is part two of what I'm told is the last interview ever granted by Dan Peake, who is co-founder of the band America. I've not validated it, but everybody else seems to have had. So, from all indications, even from the family, this is the part two of Dan's final interview that was conducted almost exactly a month before he passed away in his sleep in 2011. As I record this intro, it is December of 2024. So a little over, well, 13, almost 13 and a half years after his passing. As I said in the intro to part one, I finally am making the audio available. The first audio was largely unedited. There was some unnecessary things removed and family stuff, meaning his family, that I didn't feel was appropriate to include on there because it's just family stuff, and that's for them to have and look back on, which they have the full audios, both parts. This part is a bit heavier redacted or edited because there was a lot more family things and a lot more health things pertaining to his father that again I didn't feel appropriate to share. And but I did share, or I am sharing, as you'll hear on here, some comments that Dan made about his own health, which I thought were a bit prescient, being that a month later he was dead. And so I feel like those were probably good comments for us to hear as fans after all these years. And so to that point, yeah, this will be a lot more edited. And you'll hear some rough transition from point A to point B on that. I didn't try to, be real slick on the transition. I want you guys to know where the transitions are and just put it out there as it is, like I always do with my interviews. I don't try to blow anybody away, just casual conversations. And that's one thing I hope you take from this part two is just how laid back and gracious Dan was to me. And he was pretty open about his relationship with the remaining two guys. And I want to make a comment about that. This was 13 and a half years ago. I didn't know anybody in this business, and this was my first and, well, the only interviews as in two parts with Dan. And I was just agreeing along verbally with him with what he had to say, more as an acknowledgement than anything else. But um, after that interview and in talking with other people, I've come to know that Dan was quite opinionated. Some said very suspicious, if not paranoid. And so I'd like for you to hear his comments in that context, because people that knew him very well and loved him dearly had that to say about him. So I didn't know him, never met him in person other than on the phone, as you're going to hear. And that's the extent of it. I have no bones to pick with anybody on this, not with Dewey or Jerry and the band, or anybody else. I'm just a fan like you guys are, and just putting it out there for us to hear. And I'm sure maybe Dewey and Jerry will hear this. I know Jude Warren had referenced it from the written version on the website, boomerocity.com. And so, anyway, just to say all that to say this, please listen to it as from the perspective of where Dan was a month before his passing. And regardless of any feuding that was going on between him and the band, I, as a mutual fan, encourage you all to not let anything change your love for the band or their music, whether individually or as a whole, because that's really what this is all about. Dan had his faith. He was very serious about his faith, apparently, from what I gathered in our conversations. And I think he was genuine about it. He might have been flawed in how he presented it or lived it, but who of us ever get it perfect, regardless of what our faith is? So, again, please enjoy this. Please share it with other America fans or Dan Peak fans. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, we do talk a bit about his Christian work on there because after he left the band, he was very heavy into Christian music. And that's a beautiful thing as far as I'm concerned. You may feel differently. And don't, if you're not a Christian, please don't feel like you're going to hear a bunch of preaching and stuff. That's not the case. This is about talking to one of the members of one of the most influential bands of the 70s, America. And if you're a fan, you're going to love it. If you're not a fan, you may find it interesting. Either way, I'd encourage you to listen to the whole thing. So without any further ado, here is part two of what is said to be the final interview that Dan Peak of America granted before his 1 month before his death. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care.
Hello, this is Randy.
Hey, Randy, it's Dan Peak. How you doing?
Pretty good. How you doing, Dan?
Was this the right day for part two?
Yes, it was.
Oh, good. These old timers, I think we're devolving as a species. I don't think I'm going to make it to 80 personally. I mean, my doctor told me when I was in my 30s I was a 30-year-old man in an 80-year-old body. And I said, Doc, it ain't the years, it's the mileage. And it was all that healthy living on the road and
yeah,
never sleeping, rarely eating.
Yeah.
And
but
yeah.
Well, hey, I get to thinking about something, and maybe this is not a direction of questions you necessarily want to go down or anything. And I thought of different ways to ask it, because every time I thought it, well, I'll just ask this, and I thought, well, might come across judgmental or whatever. So just believe me when I say if it comes across judgmental, I don't mean for it to, but I just not smart enough to think of another way. I thought a lot about your comments and your feelings and your desires to reunite in some way, shape, or form with the other two guys from the band. And yesterday I had an interview with Dave Mason, and I was hearing some of his thoughts about Steve Winwood and those guys from Traffic, and then a week or two ago Mark Farner was sharing his heartburn and disappointment about all that. I'm wondering if these guys and even with your former bandmates, I wonder if you're just threatened by you guys from an attention standpoint. And
yeah, that's a big part of it, and we might as well get the party started. If you're rolling tape or whatever,
yeah, it's on.
Rolling digital.
Yep, it's on.
Ones and zeros. They're about. Had to be, I don't know, probably 10 years ago or so. But I got a call. I'm lying in my hammock looking at the ocean, and I get a call from none other than John Hartman. He had been our manager for a while. I would love to know why they ultimately parted ways, Dewey, Jerry, and John. But nobody has shed any light on that for me. But back to the point, John called me and said, hey, I've already talked to Dewey and Jerry, and they said that they'll do it, but we've got a deal set up. Gary Katz, he's produced Steely Dan, and I don't know all the other bands, but he's a fairly legendary producer, Gary Katz. And he said, we've got a label deal set up with Sony, and they've offered us, it was a nice 7-figure number that was attractive enough, even divided by 3, that would be, very tempting to Dewey and Jerry, and certainly to me. And he said, but I just, wanted to know, are you in or are you out? And I said, well, John, I probably, although it's somewhat of a disruption to my life right now, I really do miss making music with the guys. That's probably the thing I miss the most, is just the studio experience of sitting down and making music. And I somewhat miss a little bit of the performing aspect of it, but mainly it was just making music together. You know, it was really a synergistic experience with the three of us. And so I said, okay, if they're game, you know, I'm in. So about 2 weeks later, I get a call from him, and he goes, they changed their mind. They don't want to do it. They don't, you know, they don't want to do a reunion album. It was basically just one album, you know, and it made me nuts. So I sat down and I wrote a letter to Dewey, and I said, you know, you know, this is what John told me, you know, but B, I want to hear it, you know, from your mouth. You know, what are the reasons that you are so opposed to reuniting in any form or fashion? And he wrote back and said, he gave 3 reasons, but the number one reason was all the attention will be on you. And I thought, wow. So, you know, that you know, and the other thing was that, too, we've been beating our brains out for however many years it had been since I'd left to be established as a duo. But the number one thing was that, you know, all eyes will be on the you know, on Dan Peake. And so I think I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's cool you talked with Dave Mason. I love him. I bought his CD and I cannot find it anywhere in the house.
Which one? The new one, the 24 letters?
No, actually, it was the one with him. I can't remember the name of it even. Did you lose my vocal for a minute? I think the cord slipped out of the
Nope,
phone.
I heard you the whole time.
Okay, great. But you know, certainly there would be a tendency, you know, for the person who comes back to have a lot of the focus on them, you know, and that could be a reason. It just, you know.
Well, I think, I mean, personally, this is just, you know, from the audience looking towards the stage here. I think that, you know, for the super diehard fans that have followed you every day for, you know, from the beginning, obviously that's going to stand out. I think for a lot of the, what I categorize as the average fan, the listener that say, "Oh heck, look who's coming through! It's America. I wonder how many of the original members are there."
Yeah.
And I hear this. I mean, I hear this for all the interviews I've done. They'll say, "Well, you know, whether it's Journey or Three Dog," I didn't do Chuck, but you know, all the different ones. They say, "Well, you know, the band's okay, but I miss so and so," and so there's those kinds of diehards. But I think that, I mean, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I really think that they need to get over that part of it, because I think people are really more interested in seeing the whole as they are, more than they are wondering if it's just, and this is certainly no offense to you, but whether or not it's more just you versus them. And there's going to be the Dan Peake fans from the, you know, from the CCM aspect of it, and that, there's no denying that, but no more than there's going to be the duo fans that have, you know, that have followed them over the last few years. I mean, I don't understand. I think it's being a little myopic on his part, and certainly none of this part's going into the piece, but I just really am I'm kind of confused sometimes about why these guys think the way they do, and maybe it's a power trip or something. I don't know. Well,
you know, Jerry, you know, is the kind of guy, once he makes his mind up, that's it. There ain't no, I mean, I'm a person who I vacillate and, you know, just sort of wishy-washy about stuff, and, you know, oh, okay, yeah. Well, no. But, okay, yeah. But, I mean, he just was the type of person that, from knowing him for at least, I don't know, 12 years, before, I mean, we were friends before, we played in a band before, you know, like a high school band back in London in the 60s, and so, but he was the kind of guy, once he made his mind up, that was it. You know, there was no going back. So I was a little stunned when Hartman called, you know, and said that they had, you know, because as far as I knew, you know, I had never heard him ever say no. You know, I think I'd read an interview where Dewey said, "We'll never say never," you know, about a reunion. But there was also a thing, I have a blog site, Dan Peake can get to it from danpeak.com, it's a little blog tab, but there's a thing called America Days that's some stories that didn't actually make it into my book, An American Band, The America Story, and one of them is called Let's Not Do Lunch, and this happened just a couple of years ago. There's a place, because my family lives in Missouri, I when I come back to the States, I come and hang with them, and Rusty Young of Poco married a girl from basically very near where my family lives. Well, they ultimately built a place not far from this thing called Wildwood. I think it's called Wildwood Springs, and it's a kind of way off the beaten path, laid back venue that where you go and you spend the night in this old kind of hotel with a gorgeous old dining room, sort of like The Shining,
Oh man.
place. But apparently it's a really cool venue. It only seats about 100 people, and they're basically sitting in everything from folding chairs to overstuffed armchairs and couches. And so Rusty is the unofficial mayor of Wildwood Springs, because he now lives just down the road from there. He and his wife built a beautiful home out in that area near Steelville, Cuba. But he called me one day. And I just happened to be in town visiting my folks, and he called and he said, "Dewey and Jerry are going to be playing at Wildwood Springs. It'd be so neat if you just came and just kind of popped in and sat in with them." I said, "Well, Rusty, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's a surprise they don't want to have." But I said I would love to see him. In fact, here's the thing: the drive would take me, a couple hours coming and going, and I don't really want to drive at night because it's just a horrendous road to get there. It's way out in the boonies. So I said, why don't we just? He'd called me at 9 in the morning. I said, why don't you just check with them? They've got the whole day off. They're not doing their set till the night. Why don't I just come out and let's just sit down and do lunch? And he said, "Oh, that'd be a great idea. There's a great little barbecue place in Cuba or wherever." And so about an hour goes by, about an hour and a half goes by, and I'm kind of wondering, well, what's up? Finally, Rusty calls back, and he was so sheepish. And he goes, "Dan, I'm sorry, they don't want to do it. They in fact." And I really grilled him. I said, "Look, just tell me exactly what they said." And it was like, it's like the last thing in the world we want to do is, be perceived as, reuniting, as if somebody would be spying on this little barbecue stand out in the middle of nowhere. A writer from Rolling Stone might be, sitting at the next picnic table.
Yeah.
And, but it was just basically his way of saying, ain't no way, nothing is going to get us back together, even for lunch. And frankly, it kind of hurt my feelings. It was like, look, I don't want to be back in the band. I don't even want to do an album. I don't want to do a single. I don't want to sit in on your set. I don't, because I've been down that road before. And there's another episode. It's called "It's All Greek to Me," about a long time back when they asked me to, come to the Greek Theater and see him and ask me out on stage, and it was just turned into the most embarrassing, horrible debacle in the world for me. Maybe not for them, but it was for me. And so they just made it loud and clear, and I think they really hurt Rusty's feelings too, because they said some kind of nasty things about Wildwood and stuff like that, and that's like his it's like his baby. He doesn't own it, but he's best friends with the guy that does own it, and Poco plays there a lot. America plays there a lot. A lot of bands do. It's kind of an interesting venue. But long story short, there really I just don't see any way in the world that there would ever be a possibility of a reunion. So having said that, I think Americans love an underdog, and so I think I'm perceived as the underdog in this battle or whatever it is. And I know it drives them crazy because people continually ask, where's the other guy? Where's Dan Peek? Where's the... And I don't know, it gives me a chuckle thinking of that. So, but that's that sort of sums up. They don't even want it. They wouldn't even do lunch with me, man.
That's really sad because you know what? It's just like you alluded to the other day, and I think it was either you or Dave. And I swear I'm not trying to name drop, but I'm getting old too, and the days are mixing.
I love Dave Mason. Yeah. In fact, I met him. Only ever got to meet him once at a backstage at a Yes concert or something. But I just love his music, and he's just a nice man, and that's cool. Sorry.
Wait, that's all right. Hey, I'll sidetrack myself here for just a second. When you were mentioning his album, I thought you were talking about his new one that came out last year, the year before. It's called 24 Letters, and he's got a killer song on there called "How Do I Get to Heaven."
Wow.
And it's and I told him, I said that was my favorite cut on the whole song or the whole album. And he wouldn't comment on it. I mean, I didn't push him on it, but it was kind of quasi-religious and quasi-relationship, right? So it's kind of hard, but I think it's worth the download if you're interested. It's very much Dave Mason in a lot of ways, but that one song there is to me worth the price of the whole album. But what I think it was with him that I made the comment. I said, we're at the age where we're starting to lose people.
Sure.
I would hate to think that there was somebody that was a close friend of mine that I or they left this life on on terms that were less than friendly. It happened with the guys in Big Brother and the Holding Company, and James Gurley just passed away last year. And he died without speaking to Dave Getz or Sam Andrew. I mean, it's very, very, very sad that happened.
Yeah, it's like the Beatles. I mean, the prime example. Not that probably anybody really ever. But I think everybody on some level held out a little bit of hope that maybe one day, just maybe one day, they would get back together. And then, kaboom, John's gone. And then, all of a sudden George is gone, and so it just, it happens,
Well, on the book, I want to try to help plug your book too.
Right.
So, I'm staging the question here, but for those that might not consider ordering, or might consider ordering the book, but didn't know it was in existence, what can you tell me about the book itself that would be a reason why they would need to order or download it?
Well, in some ways, I felt like the sort of the Forrest Gump or the Zelig of it seemed like we were around things and people and places that really defined, the 70s music-wise. And, like working with George Martin, and that gave us an entree to meeting all the Beatles and the Stones and Derek Taylor, who had been their press agent. He started working for Warner Brothers, and there was a whole book written about him called The Longest Cocktail Hour. Actually, he's a major figure in it, but it was about Apple, their company that they started, and basically when Apple Corps dissolved, Derek went to work for Warner Brothers in England, and he was, we were very close with him, and in fact, I gave him my first gold album for our first gold album, and as a gift, because I just, he was just a lovable rogue kind of, but we just, it's talk about name dropping. I mean, I'm going to drop every name there is because we interacted at some point with everybody from the Beatles, Rolling Stones, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, David Crosby, Graham Nash, not necessarily Neil Young, but just lots of folks, the Eagles. Glenn and I at one point were practically best friends, and so just a lot of insider stuff. Joni Mitchell, we lived at the David Geffen's kind of a palace he had up in the hills, huge place, and she was living there. Jackson was living there part time, and described some of the more outrageous aspects and parties that were just kind of normal and common back in those days. But I mean, just for instance, we get there and there's Joni Mitchell lying naked on a lounger, going, "Hey, why don't you guys go for a swim? The water's fine." And the three of us didn't want to see each other's junk, so we went in and cut the legs off our trousers and jumped in and cut-offs. But we were probably the only there'd be 50 people there naked, leaping in and out. I mean, it wasn't like sexual fornicating, but it was just, that was like the in California thing, was to swim around naked, and you're up in the hills, nobody could see there, but you could sure see whatever. But there's a line in the book that's like, naked Joni Mitchell good, naked Elton bad. So that's just one of the little vignettes of,
I haven't gotten around to order it, but I've got to get it because that sounds like a good read. Really
and I've had just tremendous response. Couldn't put it down. This is the third time I've read it. I'll really pull out all the stops and plug it, and it's available at my website, danpeek.com. It's with 2 E's, P-E-E-K, danpeek.com. It's also available from Amazon, and it's now also available as an ebook through all the major ebook outlets, Amazon, Sony, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, or whatever they are, Apple iBooks, or so. Plug-a-roo,
Definitely will. I'll link to them, so I'll make it easy for an impulse buy there.
Yeah.
So, is there a plan for a sequel to it?
Well, I have actually released an ebook sequel, which it's called Our Day in the Sun, which incorporates some of the stories that they didn't get into the book because they weren't good enough. It's just I hadn't written them yet. But there were some of the vignettes that I was telling you about that are on the blog site right now. But I put them into a book that I wrote about the first 15 years or so that my wife and I lived in the Caribbean. And I don't know if you've ever read Don't Stop the Carnival or A Year in Provence, but it's kind of like Don't Stop the Carnival meets A Year in Provence, and just the fascinating, incredible life that we experienced in living down there, just more or less severing all ties with friends and family here. I don't mean severing ties, but just because I grew up in the military, to me it was not daunting to move to a foreign country. So we just pretty much packed up lock, stock, and barrel and moved to the Caribbean and spent the next 15 years basically rehabbing a 100-year-old house by the sea, and it was the labor of love. It turned out to be just a tremendous experience. But there are at least 4 or 5 America Days vignettes that are in there, and that's called Our Day in the Sun. It's also available through all the different outlets, only as an ebook, but Our Day, American Band, The America Story, is the only paperback physical book that's in release now. So.
Okay. Well, looking back on your years with America, if you could go back in time and change anything, and so this is a 2-part question here. A, would you? And B, if you would, what would it be?
One thing I would never have started drinking again. I ended up getting hepatitis from drinking raw milk. I got to California, everybody there was just these health nuts, and it's like, well, you need to start eating cashews and pine nuts and drink raw milk. Well, I bought a gallon of raw milk, and I was one of the lucky few who got hepatitis plus Q fever, a rare bovine disease that mainly only cattle get. It nearly killed me. But guy that was my doctor said, well, you need to, you can't drink for at least a year, and you really probably shouldn't ever drink again. Well, I thought, well, a year, I'll quit for 2 years, and then I'll start back up. Well, that was the beginning of the end. I should never have started drinking again, because it really led me down a road that, was a road to nowhere. So that I would change, just, and as far as anything else, I think with the wisdom of hindsight, we were way too competitive in some ways as band members, and I think I would rein in some of my competitive spirit a little bit. I mean, and all three of us were like that. I mean, we were like, three puppies fighting over one teat on the mama dog, and there's healthy competition and there's unhealthy. I think ours was an unhealthy competition. So I think I would, at least for my own part, and I would hope the other guys too would have reined back some of their competitive spirit, because there was a lot of pressure on each one of us, not just to write songs, but he who got the first single release got the most money. That's just the way it worked in the music business. More money was poured into promoting the first single, and he who got the single, period, made more money. So we would use all our resources to knife each other in the back to make sure one of our songs got released as the single, and hopefully the first single out of the box. So I would hopefully the three of us would have just backed that down a notch.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't realize it was that the business would foster. I mean, I've read it, and I guess it shouldn't be a surprise to me, but how the business would foster that kind of.
Yeah, well, like John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they made a deal at the very beginning. We're going to be a songwriting team, and even if one of us writes an entire song and the other guy, sneezes on the track, he's going to be credited as a co-writer. And that, I think, took away a lot of the unhealthy aspect of competition. But George himself said that they were competitive, but it was a healthy competition. And that was their method, I think, of dealing with. I mean, ultimately, there was a lot of jealousy. I think John was very jealous of Paul. Paul kind of became the dominant writer later in the later years, and but then that was just more for bragging rights. It wasn't about the money. I mean, they were making money hand over fist. It didn't matter who wrote the song. I mean, yesterday, Paul wrote the whole dadgum song, but it's credited to Paul McCartney and John Lennon. And so but at least it took the edge off the competition to the point where I think they weren't, it wasn't an unhealthy competition. Ours, because of this, and I had suggested, why don't we do the same thing? Let's just, because on a lot of our songs, we would help each other out. I would write some lyrics for the song Sandman, or Dewey would write a lyric for Donkey Jaw, or Jerry would write a lyric for something else. I mean, on the first album, in fact, Jerry and I probably should have been credited with writing credits on virtually every song that Dewey was credited for, because we took snippets of little things that Dewey had written and put them together and arranged them. So, but that was shot down quickly in terms of splitting the thing three ways. Just, let's just do a McCartney-Lennon thing and just credit everything to the band. I think U2 might have the same kind of arrangement. They're all credited as writers. So that, on who knows, maybe on some level that takes an edge off of everybody, and they become less competitive, and therefore they don't write as good a song. It could potentially backfire, but it's a jungle out there when it came down to who got the single and in what order they were released.
Man, I never even gave that part of it a thought, but it makes all the sense in the world to me now. But It's just unfortunate that probably planted those kind of the seeds of that, of what you're experiencing now with them.
Well, the Bible says where envy and strife enter in, all other manner of sin come in. And on some level, it's hard not to be envious and hard not to strive if you feel like somebody else is unfairly getting the single, and then that happened. I mean, there were times where I think unfairly somebody got the single green light, in the order of their choosing for reasons other than the song, the quality of the song, so the quality of the record. So it kind of opens up a can of worms on some level.
I think in Chuck McGrawn's book, Three Dog Nightmare, if you haven't read it, it's a pretty good book. It's he kind of falls on the sword on a lot of what went wrong with the band and all that, but he shed some light into that, but it was more about whose vocals were highlighted versus so much songwriting credits.
Because they usually cut other people's material. Yeah, that's interesting. So they had their own competition going as to who probably sang lead vocal on the track. And that's
and I think that's and for those reasons, it's why you'll see a 2-dog night and a 1-dog night, but not a 3-dog night. It's just not going to happen, and it's unfortunate because in my mind, Chuck's the voice, but that's same kind of thing that you've been experiencing there. But what haven't you done career-wise that what would you like to do career-wise that you haven't done already?
Oh man, I really can't think anything. I've really been doing a lot more writing of like books and stuff. And I maybe it was the years living in Hollywood, but I'd like to get into film work, and maybe scoring a movie or writing a screenplay or something. I've got lots of material that I've written that in terms of prose and stuff, but here's something I wish had happened. Garth Brooks recorded a song I wrote called "Don't Cross the River." It was a hit for us. It was from the Homecoming album, and he released it on a Scarecrow album, and it's also on his box set. And I wish he would release it as a single. I think he really kind of missed it because he would have dragged in a whole bunch of America fans into the more country genre and capitalized on that. And in some reviews they gave it the thumbs up as the tune on the record, the track on the record. But it was in some ways there's almost nothing that other than him not releasing that as a single, which I wish he had. That's probably and Jars of Clay recorded my song "Lonely People." So in a way, I've had everything. I've had all my wishes and desires and dreams fulfilled. So it's I guess it's either bringing me to a midlife crisis or making me a satisfied little boy that that just whittles in his spare time. I'm not quite sure which yet. I haven't decided which way to go with it. But I really honestly can't think of anything else, on a musical level that I would want to do or that I haven't done already. It's been a great, very, 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 very fulfilling career. And probably 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, gee, I would love to get back together and make a record with Dooney and Jerry, but now I realize it just ain't going to happen, and I don't want, someone doing something that they're not 100% into anyway. So I don't, see how anybody could possibly hold their feet to a fire to make that happen, but I've kind of been there, done that, and pretty much a satisfied, happy camper.
Well, good. That's a good thing to hear. From a standpoint of the band, knowing what you know now, do you think an America-type band would achieve today what you guys achieved back in the 70s?
You mean in terms of the sound, the genre?
And the success, yeah.
I don't know. The music business has changed so much that I mean, there are bands that break out, from their first record on out, and so I'm not sure if that's what you're alluding to, or just again that genre, the kind of acoustic rock thing.
Yeah, or that type of deal where it's
Yeah. It would be nice. I mean, I really get a nice jolt from if I turn on the radio and I happen to put it on a station that's not an oldie station, and I hear a song, not just a boombox beatbox with a bunch of kind of chanting hip hop, rap, whatever it's called, and you actually hear a song that's a thrill, and there has been 2 or 3 ventures into the sort of acoustic rock or more folky acoustic arena. Who I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get a name of anybody that comes to the top of my head, but they're you will hear them every once in a while. But it would be nice to have a revival on some level, I think, of that type of music. But these days, if you want to hear that, you go to a station that plays 70s music, and you hear the Eagles in America, and CSNY, and Jackson, and some of the other people, and so I guess that's just the nice part of it is there's still places you can hear the music, and if worst comes to worst, you order the CD or you download it or whatever and put it in your iPad or iPod. I don't even have one, so I don't even know what they're called. I'm a huge CD fan, I got to tell you. The CD was the greatest invention ever made. Is from a musician standpoint, it's just like, and back in the day when we made vinyl records and even cassettes, you would slave away for a month or 2 months, and you'd make a record, and when it finally came out, it just sounded like crap compared to what you were listening to in the studio. Because if people out there don't know it, on vinyl, they had to take out a lot of the highs and a lot of the lows. Otherwise, the record would be skipping and bouncing around from the lows and doing crazy hissing sounds from the highs. And then cassettes, the way they were just mass produced on the cheapest possible tape at 10 times the speed of sound, they sounded like garbage. But when the CD first came out, and I heard one, and I just went, I'm getting this. So I bought it. I still have it today. My little Sony Discman. It still works. I bought it probably 20 years ago. And to cut to the chase, I got a friend of mine brought a CD of Homecoming, which is probably my favorite America album, and I put it on, put the headphones on, and it was just, I was back in the studio again, listening to the 16-track master. It was just that real. It was just that live. There was like no quality loss whatsoever from the original, either half-inch mix or whatever, quarter-inch mixtape to the CD, or the 16-track to the CD. It was bliss. I mean, it just blew me away. No pops, hisses, scratches, breakage, tangled up tape that you throw out the window, cassette, jamming in your thing. So I say long live the CD, and that's been an incredible boon on every level to the music business, I think.
Well, that's the reason why I like, people say, why don't you just download? I said, well, it's faster and more convenient, and I do have all my stuff on my pod, but I like having the physical media for 2 reasons. For the sound, like you talked about, and also just all the notes, the information that's, I miss looking at album covers because of the artwork, because of the photography, because of the information that it would contain on the sleeves and all that. I miss that aspect of it.
I got a whole chapter on that in my book because we worked with Gary Burton and Henry Diltz, who did like all of the Eagles and CSNY and the whole, as I call them, Laurel Canyon gang. And when the album, was such a huge canvas on some level, I mean, it could really be art. You could really put some serious art on those covers. Now the CD, it's a little different. It's a smaller canvas, but at least you got, like you said, you can look at it and you can read the credits and titles and stuff. So that's pretty cool. So, but that's and in a way I miss like posters too. It's always at first so many thousands of copies of a record. A lot of times a poster would come with it, and that was pretty cool. Young and on your wall, and
or with Cheech and Chong, you had the roach paper, but
sure,
the rolling paper. I mean, it shows you what I know. But well, from the standpoint of Dan Peak fans out there, are they going to ever be able to see you perform live somewhere here in the States, or are they going to have to camp out in the Bahamas to catch you singing from the patio, or what's going to happen with that?
The last thing I did a favor for a friend of mine who was opening a coffee shop, and I said, yeah. He asked me if I would play, and I said, yeah. It nearly killed me. I got to tell you, it was. I was so nervous. I had never been so nervous in my life before a show. So I'm going to have to say probably not. Pretty much about a 99% chance of me not doing anything live. So sorry about that, folks.
Well, that's disappointing. I'm sure there's a lot of people who love to hear you and hear you sing the tunes.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll change your mind. Maybe there'll be enough response from this interview that you'll change.
There you go. Yeah, I get some people writing to me and saying when and where or if, and I usually, it's like Mark Twain said about physical exercise. Somebody said, do you partake of physical exercise for your health? He goes, well, if I think about it, what I do is I usually lay down and wait till the feeling passes. So that's kind of me with live performing. I go lay down until the feeling passes.
Well, I've got 5 more questions for you, and I'm going to take them a little bit out of order, and these will go into a different direction that we've talked about altogether, except for the last question I'll ask you. So, from the standpoint of guitar work and guitar gear, what do you prefer playing, electric or acoustic? You still more of an acoustic guy, or do you like wailing away on electric? What's your preference there?
Probably deep down inside, I'm still an electric guitar fan. I mean, I just, especially now with a lot of the new effects that will just, duplicate any kind of guitar sound. You plug in any kind of an electric, and it'll duplicate any other kind of electric sound, and just some great effects. So probably that. I mean, I do like the acoustic for if you're just wanting to sit around and strum a song and sing to yourself. But deep down inside, I'm still a rock and roller with an electric guitar in his hand. So,
well, if you don't mind me asking, how many guitars do you own?
Well, I did own quite a few, but I donated a bunch to the Ronald McDonald House charities, and they were able to raise a substantial amount of money on that, and probably shouldn't be patting myself on the back, but I just thought, most of my guitars are just sitting around gathering dust and, molding, so I just pared down to the basics, and I have a really, really nice handmade 12-string. I have a Yamaha kind of a 3/4 sized acoustic 6-string. I've got a Gretsch Country Gentleman, Chet Atkins signature series, and I think that's it. I've got a Music Man bass. but I really went nuts and just pared down. Oh, and I also have a real nice, it's like almost a half size nylon string guitar that my wife ordered out of a Montgomery Ward's catalog or something, and we were gonna just let the kids, or not kids, but nephews and nieces play with it. And I got it, pulled it out of the box, and went, nobody's touching this but me. And it just blew me away, and I just love it. So I've got my nylon strings, my steel string acoustics, and my favorite electric guitar, and that's it,
Is there a holy grail that you'd like to have from a?
Well, I over the years bounced back and forth on a Stratocaster, and one time I probably should have bought it. It was a knockoff, like a Japanese imitation of one. It was like $120. I should have just bought it because I do miss having that Stratocaster sound. But I think I've got an effects thing that has like 50 different effects, and I think one of them in there is the Strat sound anyway. So probably, if there was a holy grail, it would be that.
It's in the pedal then, huh?
yeah. And probably the Roger McGuinn reissue series of the Rickenbacker 12s. That if I was going to lust after something, that would be it.
You might ought to come to the Dallas Guitar Show sometime, and you may stumble on one. That's a fun show to go to. You might enjoy that.
Wow.
One more guitar question, and then the final question. Which guitar slingers impress you the most, and why?
Oh, well, I don't know what it was. Jeff Beck, when I was growing up, just blew me away. I mean, he's probably way too avant-garde for most people, but I just loved his just kind of raucous, all over the place style. Of course, everybody loves Clapton. I'm a fan of the early days Clapton much more than the slow hand era, but the early Cream kind of stuff, he was just killer. Jimmy Page, definitely no slouch. And can't think. Oh, and of course Hendrix. He really they broke the mold after Hendrix. In terms of modern day guitarists, since it's not really a big feature anymore, it seems to me, probably Eddie Van Halen, would be the guy, in the last 10, 20 years that's just done his thing. And then there's the dude that's kind of the knockoff of Jimi Hendrix. He's pretty cool, but the real thing to me was Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, the final question is, when everything is said and done and your life is over and people are remembering you, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh, wow. That's a toughie. I think probably I gave it all I had. I did my best, and I hope it was good enough.
Well, good deal. Well, that's all I have. Was there anything that I didn't ask you or didn't cover that you would like to talk about?
No.
And I hope you have a great time with your family and the reunion goes well. And
this is going to be, it's kind of worked out real neat because I haven't seen my brother from England in a number of years, and this is actually kind of a blessing in disguise. So,
good.
But it's been great talking to you, Randy.
Likewise, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you for the interest. I really appreciate it, and a blessing on you, sir.
Oh, well, thank you, and you too, and believe me, it was a thrill of mine, and I appreciate your time in devoting to this. I really do.
Oh, well, again, I just appreciate you, being interested enough to kind of keep the story alive. So
you betcha, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, buddy.
Appreciate it.
God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.